To escape bullying, he locked himself up for 5 years in despair, and without any hope for the future, he continued and lived his boring life until death came to him suddenly. After Hart returned, he was very lucky to meet the sorceress who granted him new skills through reincarnation in a world that was about to receive magic. Magic was considered the absolute power, and out of pity for him, the sorceress tried her best to give him a slightly easier life. Hart's life began anew in the body of a small child, accompanied by the king's applause. The king thanked Giselot for bringing him a beautiful prince resembling him and her, with a royal crest on the child's chest. Hart wondered if the handsome man and beautiful woman next to him were his parents. He began imagining beautiful scenes in his new life. Anyway, the leader ordered a servant to bring a sphere to measure the child's magic power. And when they discovered that Hart had a magic index of only 2 and no other attributes to use except barrier magic, the two were shocked. The king said if the news spread that the child born to him had no power, there would definitely be problems. Giselot, also troubled, insisted that this information must not leave the room at all. Hart, while lying in his bed, felt a bad sensation. Then the parents announced together that Prince Hart, born today, died. Then Hart was left in the forest, and they abandoned him there. The sorceress, when she heard the chaotic news, didn't know what to do. The child she tried to give an easier life to fell into a miserable life from the first day. Maybe because the magic measurement device in the world displayed a number of only 2 digits. But the number she had put was of 4 digits. In the forest, Hart faced a problem while being in a child's body. He couldn't do anything. He remembered to use magic as people told him. So he started making a flying square as a barrier. He could enlarge it and change its color. He could do anything he imagined. Hart's movement attracted a fox that intended to eat him. Hart used his magical power to avoid the fox's bite, and he was also able to move with branches and rocks and pressure the strange magical monster. Hart was able to understand the fox while she was begging for mercy and surrendering. She sat next to him and said she intended to eat him to increase her magical power, but she didn't expect him to be this strong. Hart used a sound barrier to talk to her. When she asked about his identity, he replied right away, saying he was just a child abandoned because his power was low. The girl saw magic currents running from his heart beautifully. After thinking again, she screamed and asked if he was the reincarnation of the Demon King. Then she rolled on the ground and said she surrendered and asked him to kill her. Hart wasn't interested. He replied, saying as long as she doesn't attack anyone else on her own, everything is fine. Flay, the fox, praised Hart for his generosity and said he deserved the title of Demon King while in a child's body. Hart didn't have the energy to argue with her. After using great power, facing Flay, he was about to faint from hunger. At that moment, a man arrived with a bag of milk, but Flay stopped him and didn't let the man get close to her master. Gold explained that the child is a distant relative of his, and even though he doesn't know why the child was abandoned, he came to save him. Hart whispered to Flay to take the milk quickly because he was about to die of hunger. Flay remained suspicious and asked him why Gold cared about someone else's child to the point of bringing him milk in the middle of the forest at night. Gold replied while in pain, saying that his wife once gave birth to a child, but unfortunately, the child couldn't cry as soon as he was born. Hart was abandoned because his power was low, but for a barbarian like Gold, that didn't matter. Whatever the child's condition, he wanted the boy to live his life. When Flay saw Gold crying while hearing the story, she hadn't seen a strange magical creature like this before, who not only cries, but also accepted a human boy as a master. He suggested that if Flay accepted the boy as her master, he would also take her as a servant. Touched by Gold's mercy, Flay decided to follow Hart and take care of him. The agreement between the two was made. Gold broke Hart's bed carefully and tore his clothes, and finally poured fresh blood on them. 9 years passed, and Hart was raised in the family of Baron Gold on the border. He planned to leave after he finished breastfeeding, but without realizing it, he stayed because of the kindness of his adoptive parents. Hart had a little sister named Char, and she was always afraid to get close to him, but Char liked to follow Flay and wanted to play with her. Flay was cold and refused, saying that her important mission was to care for Hart. Suddenly, Hart interrupted them and asked Flay to take care of his sister. Then he stood watching them playing happily, and his lonely figure looked a bit lonely. Natalia came and told Hart not to worry. As a mother, she guessed that Char just didn't know how to deal with someone her own age. Hart totally collapsed when he heard this and fell on his back and wondered if the little girl saw his true age. Natalia tried to reassure him and told Hart not to worry and that he could bring a gift for the little girl. Also, it was not good for him as the successor of the future for the land to keep locking himself in his room. Hart returned to his room, still thinking about his plan to leave the family. Over 9 years, while preparing to leave the family, he dedicated himself to studying barrier magic and succeeded in making a barrier robot that looked exactly like him, but it still couldn't speak or move. Gold came to Hart's room and called him to come train, asking him what he was doing locked in his room all day. Hart thought for a bit, then replied saying it was very natural to lock himself up to study ancient magic. magic. Gold was pleased with his son's answer and threw a sword at him to test his power. Surprisingly, Hart broke the sword in Gold's hand, who then announced he would attack him with a second strike. As the sword was about to reach Hart, he jumped immediately to avoid the blow. Gold stood amazed and looked at his son. The power required to avoid what happened was above level 30. In truth, regarding this matter, he still felt there was something strange. Gold whispered a question. Maybe it was a subconscious awakening. At night, when he met his wife, Gold told her that according to his expectation, Hart could very well be a reincarnated magical being. Natalia didn't agree because Hart didn't have a tail or long ears. Gold remembered the royal crest on his chest, but with a magical beast like Flay following him, he must be an extraordinary person. Natalia rejected all her husband's doubts and confirmed that Hart was a normal child and nothing more. Little Char, lying on her mother's lap, opened her eyes, slowly with a firm and determined look, to believe that her brother was not a magical being. After training with his father for a short while, Hart noticed his father's repeated absence from home. Curiously, wanting to know what he was busy with, he activated a surveillance barrier and saw many wounded soldiers next to him. He tracked the location and asked him what happened. Gold told his son sadly that the territory was being looted by bandits, but their location was unknown, making it difficult to resolve the situation cleanly. This was very dangerous for Hart, who had a child's body. After explaining everything clearly, Gold told him to return home quickly. Hart obeyed his father's words and went back, but he passed by the wounded soldiers lying on the ground. He quietly used healing magic on them. That night, he and Flay planned to help his father end this problem. The first step was to find the bandits who attacked the soldiers through the surveillance system. What they found was beyond their expectations. Among the bandits, a soldier under Gold's command appeared. Flay guessed that the enemy had someone on the inside with the Baron's information, and this was a threat that had to be eliminated immediately. Hart and Flay flew from the house on a moonlit night, and this scene was accidentally seen by his sister Char at the bandit base. After news reached them of the great victory today, they were celebrating with great joy. The leader ordered them to complete their mission quickly to return to the Empire. Suddenly, Hart and Flay appeared. He used magic to freeze them in their place and asked them calmly who they were. When he saw they wouldn't cooperate, Hart grabbed the first one of them and threw him against the wall, warning them that their only task was to answer his questions. After getting the answers, Hart put all the events together and understood the whole situation. Only one person higher than his father could have done this. There was only one possibility. Someone in the kingdom was targeting Gold's life. Before leaving, Hart ordered Flay to burn the entire fortress. Those who attacked his father didn't deserve mercy. On their way back, Hart told Flay that whether they were imperial people or anyone else, he wouldn't forgive anyone who touches the people close to him. Now, he would send an anonymous message to his father about today's events. In the morning, Gold received the news inside the house and said he felt the bandits weren't normal, but he didn't imagine the Empire could be involved. Char, while sitting on her father's lap, asked who killed the bad guys. Gold replied saying he was also wondering if someone had power and was familiar with the territory. It could just be Flay. She was likely roaming the territory and subduing magic beasts, so she might have handled this matter too. Char appeared as if she understood something. She jumped quickly and requested permission to leave because she thought of another possibility and couldn't tell her father. The little girl found Flay and asked her if her brother had two personalities. She told her she saw her brother and Flay flying from the house, so she entered his room to check and found her brother still, sleeping in bed, but without the scary aura that always appeared. Flay didn't answer the girl and tried to speak by praising that she could see the magical powers around Hart. She told the little girl that he was born with immeasurable power, and this was a very wonderful thing. Char asked another question. Did Flay know her brother's identity? Flay remained secretive and said this was a secret and children shouldn't know. Hart, while hearing her telling everything, felt he needed to be more careful in his actions. He spared no effort and made many alarm devices in case Char approached him. Over the coming days, the little girl followed Hart everywhere, whether he was bathing, reading, or training with his father. Hart wanted to stop her and ask her what was happening, but every time he approached, she would escape. On the seventh day, when the girl and Natalia were preparing to go out, she left following Hart. Hart, while worried about their safety, wanted to send Flay with them. Natalia replied saying she hadn't seen her lately and asked him if he requested anything from her. Only then did he remember he had asked Flay to drive away magic beasts that might attack the city. After his mother and sister left, Hart returned to his room and started watching them via the surveillance system on Char. As soon as he opened it, his mouth trembled while screaming, telling them not to joke like that. The the barrier showed another group of bandits appeared, and they intended to kill his mother and sister. Natalia grabbed her daughter while fleeing, wondering why. Imperial soldiers were present. Hart created a new barrier on Char, and the girl signaled her mother the specific direction. Natalia understood that someone was guiding her daughter secretly, although she didn't know who, but now was not the time to think about that. The two ran to a deep valley, and Char signaled down for her mother to jump in the middle of the path. The protection magic on Natalia finished, and she fell. The mother and daughter, when they reached the ground, knew she almost exhausted her magic power and couldn't run anymore. Char pointed to a rock ahead of them and said, "Mom, just a bit." Natalia carried the girl into a cave with glowing moss growing strangely. She looked around and thought such a bright place wasn't suitable to hide in. Natalia put Char in a hidden corner and lied, saying she would go outside to look for the person guiding the girl, without knowing who he was, but sure he was an ally of justice. Char asked her mother not to go while crying loudly. Despite her heartache, Natalia ran outside the cave believing that this was the only way to protect her daughter. As soon as she exited, the cave behind her disappeared and turned rocky. Natalia whispered, saying this was illusion magic. But who could do this? At that moment, the Imperials arrived with swords. The leader, when he saw Natalia alone, shouted to those behind him to search for the child who was surely close. Natalia knew she couldn't be a captive. She pulled her sword and prepared for action. The leader looked at her focused, afraid of her resistance, but before threatening her, the sword turned towards her neck. Hart arrived just in time and held Natalia firmly in his arms and looked at the squad with intense anger. Inside the cave, Char was calling her mother anxiously again and again, but she was afraid to be revealed to the squad and couldn't raise her voice. Hart sent Natalia inside from outside and told the little girl that her mother was fine and ordered her to stay beside her because her mother lost consciousness a little and to be patient a little and help would reach them. Char, while hidden behind a rock, felt the scary aura she was used to, but her brother had saved her and her mother, so the little girl gathered all her courage, stood up, and called her brother in a loud voice. She remembered her mother's words and asked her brother if he was an ally of justice. Hart, while not knowing how to show himself, was a bit confused by his little sister's question. Finally, he decided to go along with his sister. Now Hart laughed loudly and replied, saying, "Yes, right, I am an ally of justice." The little girl asked if her brother's power was used to destroy bad guys. She still remembered her mother's words that allies of justice punish evil. Char stood next to Hart, looked at him, screamed, and said, "Wow, and I misunderstood my brother all this time." Hart smiled and comforted his sister, telling her that because of his secret identity, he couldn't tell people. Hart returned quickly home. Aside, Gold asked him his opinion on the person who saved his sister and mother. Without thinking, he replied saying, "If the person doesn't do bad things, then he is not an enemy." Gold nodded and said, "Right, my daughter also said he is an ally of justice." Hart brought up a surface-level question and asked his father why. Despite increased patrols on the borders, they still managed to enter. Gold quickly reached the conclusion that someone infiltrated the territory before security was increased. Hart replied saying that was close, but there was something more accurate. Gold assessed his son and couldn't believe that a 9-year-old child could say these things. He returned to anger and silently cursed the old fox, who couldn't wait any longer. Char and her mother returned and interrupted the conversation between the two. After hugging her father, the little girl ran straight to her brother. The mother and father were surprised by the girl's move, wondering when the siblings became so close. Char replied saying that when the time is right, she can be a very good girl. Hart, inwardly, asked his sister to stop her insinuating way of speaking. Since the day she discovered his identity, not a day passed without Char coming to his room to play. The days when she avoided him were over, but now he was being followed everywhere. He literally didn't know what to do. Hart patted his sister's head without feeling annoyed. On the contrary, he felt like he had a pet. The little girl noticed the glowing screen on the desk and asked her brother curiously what it was. Hart explained to her that it was a surveillance barrier. When she asked if it was ancient magic, he just agreed with her and confirmed it. Hart once told his father casually that he was studying ancient magic. When he heard his sister praising him and saying he was amazing, Hart replied saying these were magical techniques whose records were lost and nothing remained of them, so the research was a bit difficult. Char, looking up to her brother, said she saw books on ancient magic in the mansion's library. As she promised, she took Hart to the ancient magic books. While looking through the books, he noticed that barrier magic bore a great resemblance to ancient magic. The little girl sat next to her brother and looked at the book he was holding and said ancient magic had many interpretations, but this was the most interesting one. Hart was surprised and asked her if she had read it. Char replied with enthusiasm, saying she learned from her mother and Flay, so she wanted her brother to read it too. When Hart saw his sister's expectant look, he couldn't refuse and started activating his big brother skills. While talking with his sister, Hart accidentally mentioned an anime character he had read about in his previous life. The girl looked at him with shining eyes, wanting to see it. Hart spoiled her, and after about about 2 weeks, he was able to design a system that could connect to the modern Japanese internet. The calculations he had made before were working well now. Hart chose content for children for his sister to watch. Char was amazed while watching the moving pictures with sound, but then another problem appeared. She said she didn't understand what they were saying and asked her brother to teach her Japanese. At first, Hart was worried that his sister, being only 5 years old, would find it difficult to learn a new language. After only 2 hours, he abandoned that idea. She had already mastered hiragana and katakana. When he saw Char writing elementary school language in the search bar, he was shocked and wondered what children in this world were like. After 2 weeks, Char ran in from outside, in a hurry asking her brother to play the next episode of Tamison. When the TV turned on, she sat on the chair obediently watching the screen. Attentive, Hart thought that 2 weeks had passed since Char started watching anime, and she had learned Japanese from the shows almost fluently. He wondered if his sister might be a prodigy. If this was true, he couldn't let her watch anime all the time. Hart began an internal conflict when he saw her. So happy, he couldn't stop her, but as a brother, he couldn't spoil her. When Char asked to watch a new episode, he refused for the first time and set a rule that she could watch only 3 hours a day. Char got upset. Throughout dinner, her mind was occupied. Natalia, sitting next to her, asked if her daughter was sleepy. Gold asked his son why his sister had been following him lately and what they were planning. Char woke from her daydream and replied quickly, saying they were studying ancient magic. Natalia happily asked if Hart was teaching his sister and said this was very good, and also added that Hart shouldn't let his sister get too obsessed. After dinner, Char was still following her brother. Hart stopped and told her that no matter how much she begged, he wouldn't let her watch more, and told her to get ready quickly for a bath and then go to sleep. Natalia, who was following them secretly, hadn't expected the siblings to be this close. She smiled and thought her dream was close to coming true. Gold, with the title of Baron, had a duty to suppress the bandits and not allow them to continue causing chaos in his territory. All 3 family members saw him off. Char whispered a prayer for her father's safe return. When he saw his sister was still upset, Hart went to her and comforted her, telling her not to worry. Although they were called bandits, they were just normal people, and he was sure his father could handle it alone. Char's curiosity made her ask her brother why these people wanted to be bandits. The little girl recalled sadly that her father said the empire recently had civil unrest. People couldn't live happily together. When Hart heard these words, even he felt that these wishes were very difficult. Char thought of something and asked if her brother was the same. If he went to battle, he wouldn't be able to do anything either, right? She stood up from the chair excitedly and explained that her brother's power could be used for this goal. Char looked at her brother with sparkling eyes again and asked for his opinion. When he looked into her eyes, Hart replied and told her that she understood. As soon as she got the confirmation, the little girl encouraged him to transform and enter the battle like hero characters. Hart spoiled his sister completely and transformed into a big warrior, the size of an adult wearing a cloak, and he could teleport immediately to the battlefield. He also opened a barrier screen for her to see the battle directly. Hart, while flying in the sky, thought that the situation had become very complicated, but for Char, he had to try his best. As soon as he found the bandits, the first thing Hart did was block their escape route. After that, he could have killed them directly, but because Char wanted to see him in action, he was forced to go down and fight them. Because he had to fight each one individually, it took a long time. When Hart finished, Gold arrived at the right time. He assessed the situation and saw that it wasn't about creating internal division. He introduced himself to Hart and then asked for information about him. In return, Hart sighed in relief that Gold didn't recognize his disguise. Gold continued to ask if he was the one who saved his wife and child before, and said that at least he must know his true goal. Suddenly, Hart's mind lit up. He posed in front of Gold and said that he was a person for justice who reinforces justice and enforces justice. After he said these classic lines, he was embarrassed by his cheesy words and flew up into the sky and disappeared. He returned to his bed pretending to be tired. Char, from behind, praised her brother enthusiastically, saying that he was very skilled. When she didn't get a reply, the little girl didn't give up and asked excitedly when he would transform again. And so, Hart entered many battles, and his identity as the Dark Warrior became known to a larger number of people, and his reputation spread far. In parallel, Hart also completed his robot version and made a version completely resembling him named Hart C. One day, Char woke up and found 2 brothers who could speak, and she couldn't distinguish her real brother. The real one grumbled and said that neither of them had time. One morning, the prince and princess came to visit Baron Gold's house. Prince List waved his hand in front of his face, annoyed, and asked why the place was full of dust like this. Indeed, this was the countryside. Princess Mary reminded her brother that he was being disrespectful. He was the one who insisted on coming here. Hart looked at the 2 and thought that he had heard before that the king's child, so the 2 standing in front of him must be his siblings. At this time, the 2 siblings on the other side were still fighting. List said that his sister was just a political pawn and didn't have the right to lecture him. List List looked at everyone present in front of him and scolded them, all for being people with no manners. He looked at Hart as if he were a research subject and asked if this was the child adopted from the orphanage with level 2. List chose him as the first one he would teach a lesson. In the training arena, he looked at Hart and told him to relax, as he would go easy on him. Hart activated his magic evaluation and knew that his current level was 9 and his maximum level could reach 40. While he was still thinking, suddenly List attacked. Hart dodged immediately by instinct, and List screamed at him not to dodge. Hart obediently activated protection and then fell on the ground pretending to be in pain, and List hit him. List rejoiced at first, but then felt bored. He asked why Hart didn't fight back. When he heard the words "fight back," Hart stood. Suddenly, and it only took a few sword strikes to knock the prince to the ground. Princess Marion was shocked and asked if Gold's son really had a level of 2. Gold replied saying this was normal, and said that he didn't know, and the boy also didn't know. So in the end, they considered it as such. List attacked again, intending to terrify Hart with magic, but all his magical power was seized by Hart and multiplied at once. Hart felt that the battle had to end here. He needed to return to his room to sleep. After Flay heard that Hart was recently completing missions alone, she appeared quickly, wanting to join the fray. Unlike Char's happy expression, Hart groaned inwardly and said that problems were back again. He couldn't stop Flay, so he was forced to order her not to do excessive combat moves in front of his sister. Flay replied quickly, saying she understood and promised that she wouldn't do that. The promise was just made, yet seconds later, she used fire immediately, wanting to burn the bandits to ashes. Hart stopped her and asked her to be patient, and asked if she remembered the promise she made. Flay, too excited, didn't hear his words and continued to shoot fire one after another. Hart couldn't bear to see more of this, so he used his magic directly and created a barrier to protect the bandits' lives. The battle became chaotic because of Flay, and when they returned home, Hart didn't have the strength to open his eyes. Flay's voice rang in the room, recounting the last operation to Char, who added some admiring comments. Hart screamed inwardly and asked himself when he would live a quiet day. Unlike the lively atmosphere, List's room was filled with gloomy air. He hit his bed hard and asked himself why he had to face something like this. He was the prince, the king's successor, and the one to continue the lineage of Princess Lightning. He couldn't suppress his anger at being defeated by a normal person with only level 2. A servant outside knocked on the door and entered to inform him about an inspection tour tomorrow and invited Char to participate. List was surprised and asked why they needed to invite a little girl with him. The servant replied that the prince needed someone to talk to along the way. When he saw that he still intended to refuse, the servant confirmed seriously that this was also part of the evaluation of the prince. That night, Hart heard the news that his sister would participate in the tour, so he had to prepare everything perfectly. He checked the entire route they would pass through via his surveillance on the screen. Suddenly, a mysterious group appeared performing strange rituals. Hart felt that something would happen soon. He approached and asked what they were doing. When they knew he was from Baron Gold's house, they decided to kill him without mercy. If matters were like that, he didn't need to show them mercy. To face Hart, they used magic from inside the circle and summoned a group of zombies. If this was in a game, he would find it nice, but in reality, it was a bit scary. He used a sword and cut them once, and although their bodies were split in two, they quickly got up again. The zombies surrounded Hart. As he approached, he created a barrier to keep them away and seized the opportunity to find the glowing points on their chests. When they saw they weren't moving again, the mysterious people screamed and ordered the zombies to attack them instead. One from inside the circle summoned a golem towards Hart. He was surprised. He didn't expect to meet a golem whose power wasn't simple. One of its strikes broke the barrier Hart made before, and he admitted he overestimated its durability. While not knowing how to attack it, he noticed a glowing point on the golem's chest, similar to the zombie's chest center. He dodged its attack and then used a sharp barrier to penetrate the glowing point. The stone broke, and the golem fell under Hart's control through magic possession. As for the remaining humans, Hart just asked who the leader was. He wanted to know his name and affiliation. The leader was identified, but he didn't answer any question from Hart. So Hart was forced to throw every follower of the leader into a deep hole to threaten him. Each one thrown was screaming, calling for the leader. Unable to watch more, the leader was forced to confess that they were a group of summoners under the queen. From his confession, Hart also knew that this whole plan was for Char's life. He thought that Char was an excellent person. Sooner or later, she would surpass the queen. Also, if the border baron had support, the future of the country would be decentralized. Hart linked the recent events. First, manipulating the imperial soldiers to attack his father, then the attack on his mother and Char. There was a high probability it was all a plot from the queen. If she could abandon him, then there was nothing she would hesitate to do for her position. Hart remembered his current family picture, which had 4 members. He would never forgive anyone who took the important people in his life. Thanks to Hart, who eliminated all dangers last night, the whole tour was executed according to the plan without any accidents. In a golden wheat field, Char ran ran ahead happily, calling Marion to come after her. Lys didn't want to sit with Hart. He looked at him once and then ran after the other three, taking the chance to be alone. Hart looked for his father. He had important questions for him. Hart asked casually what he would do if the queen targeted Char's life. Contrary to his son, Gold put his chin on his hand and whispered that it seemed his son felt something too. Last night, he received a message from the Dark Knight suspecting that the person behind all this was the queen, but he was surprised that she was targeting Char. He told Hart clearly that it was obvious she wanted to destroy their family. She was the queen above, and they couldn't do anything. He thought of something, then patted his son's head and ordered him not to do anything stupid. If the country lost her, it would suffer great. The saddest thing was that the king's authority was broken a long time ago. Hart summarized his father's words. If the queen died, civil war would break out. Gold, for the first time, told him about the army founded by Rizz, who took the demon lord's head alone. After that event, she became a hero and started to be called Princess Lightning. And so, with strong public support, Rizz married the king and became loved more and more. The important thing now was that Princess Lightning wanted to control the kingdom. Hart, who didn't want to have any relationship with his real family, didn't do any investigation all these years and felt that this was a mistake on his part. Gold, who was sitting next to him, offered him his point of view again and said if there was someone strong who could take the queen's place, it would be totally different. He had seen that person before, but they were still very young. At least he would wait until that person grew up. He emphasized that the good child would be a special person who would shake the whole kingdom. Hart heard his father's words well and believed in his heart that this person was Char. He didn't notice that Gold's eyes were evaluating him all the time. Gold felt he understood what he meant, so he finished his speech with a sentence saying he knew what his son should do, so as not to disappoint his father's hope. Hart confirmed to him that he understood and planned in his head to protect Char until she became an excellent queen. The news spread that Rizz group of summoners was completely wiped out by a knight from the border, and Char's assassination plan failed. The repeated failure in her plans made her very angry, and although she didn't want to admit it, the child Char became a threat to her. Rizz chose a weapon from the room, ready to take matters into her own hands with the sword she used to defeat the demon leader. Hart's voice was heard telling her to fight him. First, the soldiers next to Princess Lightning were blown away by magic in an instant. She looked at the Dark Knight and asked him how he could enter without the barrier, stopping him. Hart simply asked her if she meant the normal things outside and said he just broke them easily. Rizz guessed that the person in front of her must be the Dark Knight from the rumors. Immediately, she opened 3 magic circles, aiming to take his life. Hart easily exited the magic zone and then dodged countless glowing shards flying towards him. When she noticed her spells couldn't hit him, she switched to fire, wanting to burn him to ashes. When she saw Hart descending slowly to the ground, Rizz mocked him and asked him what kind of dark knight was this? Just a normal thing. And then Hart expressed his admiration that she not only knew how to use swords, but also had other abilities, and said he truly envied her. The Dark Knight suddenly attacked, and all the aura Princess Lightning felt disappeared. Hart whispered, saying he would now deal a bit seriously. The large amount of magic energy that began to flow made Princess Lightning unable to resist. Even the demon leader she killed before didn't have this large amount of magic. She wasn't going to surrender, but still held on to what she had, which made her confident she was the strongest in the world. But for the second time, Hart bewildered her and snatched the sword from her hand. Hart didn't want to fight with this old woman again. He immediately attached a chain around her neck and warned her that if she tried to remove it, her head would surely be cut off. Lightning cursed him and called him a donkey and asked if he wanted to embarrass her like this. Hart coldly told her he didn't care about her future plans, and if she continued to hurt Baron Gold's family and their lands, she wouldn't be safe, and no one but him could remove the collar from her neck. Rizz was very angry and laughed, saying this was no different from slavery. Flay said that Hart was a bit merciful with her. For a long time, she had been seeing something beautiful but incomplete. Hart replied, saying he saw that well. Now there would be peace, but if she did anything else, next time there would be no mercy. 5 years passed, and Char faced no dangers again. The lands returned to peace. Hart's display of power that year in front of Princess Lightning was the right move. Although he had been in this place for almost 15 years, the northern snow still didn't comfort him. Looking at Flay still in her usual clothes, he asked her if she didn't feel cold. Flay admitted, honestly saying of course it was cold. The human form was tiring. Hart, fed up, stood up, used magic, and put a fur coat on her, telling her to speak next time if she needed anything. Flay's eyes sparkled, and she told him she had 10 more requests, and this made him wink at her. Char quietly asked her brother if she could make a request too. She still remembered a snow-killing technique, but the next part she just whispered to Hart, so only he could hear. As a brother spoiling his sister and never refusing any request from her, this time despite his bad feeling, Hart executed what Char wanted and made a deep hole that wouldn't fill with snow. At that moment, servant, Gold and Natalia saw them by chance. He asked them what they were doing. Char whispered to her brother, worried they would be discovered. Hart quickly made a dark night dance and then disappear, telling his parents that this was that person's work to be more convincing. Hart added that he was passing by and showing them his special technique. Gold, with his eyes half closed, dropped the subject and told them to believe that explanation. As for Princess Lightning, he still didn't know what happened that year, but what he knew was she no longer appeared in public places. People rumored that she suddenly wore a collar like slaves. At first, they thought it was a new fashion, but over time they reached another conclusion that she put it on by mistake and couldn't remove it. Hart felt that from now on, the life of dependency would officially begin without worrying about anything else. With filial intuition, Hart felt something was wrong, so after a while, he moved away from Gold by a distance. Gold noticed his behavior and told him directly that in the spring he would enter the Royal Capital School. The ideal life for Hart that was right in front of him disappeared instantly. At home, Gold sat seriously to talk to his son. Before, Gold intended to send him to study at the regional school, but Hart refused strongly. Gold wiped his forehead and told him this time he couldn't refuse just because he didn't want to. Gold showed him the recommendation letter. The king appointed him directly to go. According to Gold's thinking, maybe because Princess Marion was interested in Hart's magical talent and asked the king to issue Hart. Hart still didn't understand why his sister wanted him to attend the magic school. Gold told him another piece of news. Prince List was advanced in grades and would be with Hart to study and research together for the development of the kingdom. Hart was frustrated. This was really a difficult, nifty topic. He had prepared himself to live a wonderful life of dependency all his life. Gold saw his son silent and expressed his concern, saying he wasn't sure if Gizelot was the reason the princess approached his son. But as a father, he wanted Hart to see the wider world. It was good that his son locked himself in his room for research, but above all, he wanted him to see the world outside. Hart respected his father completely and agreed to go to school. The first thing Hart needed to do was choose a servant to help him and focus on his studies. He refused his father's kind offer to choose a servant for him and refused. Also, his mother's desire to follow and care for him. Gold saw his son struggling with the choice and told him to take his time. They still had 3 months ahead. He returned to his room and began planning for a copy of him to attend school. If the copy performed poorly, they wouldn't accept him and Hart wouldn't have to go. The only way was to be terrible, academically to the point of expulsion. This was the best way for Hart to avoid upsetting his father. The copy didn't agree to go and asked what if a crazy person used magic randomly and killed him. Hart thought of a way to protect him with a barrier to prevent injury, and this made him feel a bit relieved. He sighed that no matter how perfect, he was just a copy of Hart. He also had the idea of living a dependent life. There was no other solution. He was forced to agree to go to school. The hardest thing for Hart now was finding a suitable servant while keeping it a secret from Flay and Char. While wandering aimlessly, he entered a different space full of many zombies. Remembering he asked Flay to organize them, he didn't expect that it was now a developed village. Johnny, the village leader and zombie, was very happy receiving Hart. He quickly called his friend the king and thanked him for traveling thousands of miles to visit them. Johnny stood ready to execute his orders. Hart didn't have tasks for them. He noticed there were other magic beasts and asked why they were present. Johnny replied they were wild magic beasts Flay collected and brought to the village. Hart stood watching the activities around him for a bit. Everything was clear and organized. Everyone was doing their different work. Johnny suggested asking Hart if he wanted to tour the village and then led him personally around the village. First, they looked at the well-planted crops. Thanks to these plants, the residents wouldn't live in anxiety again. After that, Johnny continued to lead Hart to several other areas and took the opportunity to tell him about the activities and mechanisms in every area. The more Hart heard, the more impressed he became. Johnny, as a kind and thoughtful person, was greatly respected by the residents and had great loyalty to Hart. Hart silently added him to the list of perfect servants while Johnny continued talking without stopping. This continuous talking made Hart uncomfortable. He thought that this man talked too much. Listening to him daily would exceed Hart's endurance. When Johnny was about to say something else, Hart interrupted him, claimed he was busy, and left the village quickly. Hart sat by a stream, closed his eyes, and sighed from the fatigue he felt. He thought he could live comfortably here alone. The quiet space around him was broken by the sound of huge footsteps on the ground, coming from a golem. He still remembered the giant golem that the summoner group had summoned with these zombies. The golem sat next to him and offered Hart a flower. Despite his large size, this wasn't a problem, so Hart gave him a place where he could be a close servant. Hart barely asked the golem several questions when suddenly the golem's entire head emitted pink smoke, and his voice said quietly that he loved his master very much. Hart ran from the forest scared, feeling frustrated, and wondered why choosing a servant was so hard. He needed to return home and rest now, but he didn't expect Flay to be waiting for him as soon as he opened the door. When she saw him entering, she asked sternly what he meant earlier about the servant. For a moment, he thought about choosing Flay Flay. But remembering his father's warning, he decided to ignore her now. In her free time, Flay took Char to visit the Magic Beast village. The little girl was talking very seriously with Johnny. Char invented a formal name for this magic village, named Pandemonium, the Garden of Monsters. Unlike the harmonious scene in the Beast village, near the lands of barren gold, a large number of ice dragon hunters were gathering. They were surrounding a small dragon while rejoicing, saying that if they caught it, they would surely earn a lot of money. The ice dragon took advantage of the heavy snow hiding the view and dragged its wounded body away to find a new shelter. When Gold heard about this, he tasked Heart with the mission of assessing the situation, fearing the dragon might attack their lands again. The dragon was severely wounded by the Empire. If it went berserk, it could hurt normal citizens. When Flay heard this, she refused to take the mission immediately because she wasn't fond of dragons. Dragons were intelligent entities and strong, but when the demon leader was in danger, they hid in mountain caves without helping. Char, who heard this conversation later, asked Flay if she didn't intend to save the small dragon. Char was sad and said that if a friend was wounded, they would surely be very lonely like previous times. Char's wish was also Heart's wish, so Flay couldn't refuse. Immediately, they went out looking for the small dragon. Standing on a high mountain, Heart used barriers to search for. Images below. In a short time, he found the location of the world dragon. It looked very weak. Flay alerted Heart to another screen. The Imperial people were getting closer, and they needed to hurry. They transformed into justice warriors and succeeded in saving the small dragon from the Imperial people. Heart heard the small dragon's voice echoing in his head, and this was the same feeling similar to when he communicated with Flay. The small dragon looked at Flay curiously and asked her if she was a magic beast and if magic beasts serve humans. Flay thought that since he was a magician, she would explain clearly the faint meeting that happened between her and Heart and his very great power. After an hour of stories, the small dragon understood, and it turned out that he was a reborn small demon leader. And this was indeed a surprising thing. The small dragon apologized because he didn't participate in the demon leader's war and explained that he didn't like fighting. Heart, standing next to them, understood magic beasts were also divided into many types. He asked curiously what he did to live until now. The small dragon replied that in order not to be discovered, he lived quietly in a mountain cave for about 300 years. At first, he spent his days inside deep caves, but then one day, an adventurer came to stay the night and left a book. The small dragon took it curiously. Many times, she wanted to read more books, so she flew towards the city, transformed into a human form, went down to the village, and brought books to return with. The small dragon repeated this move a lot and gained great knowledge until adventurers discovered her during the chase. All her books were burned. When Flay heard this, she cried for the poor girl who was expelled by humans. She decided to recognize the small dragon as a being like her and let her join Pandemonium. When Heart heard the strange name, he asked where that was. Flay replied that it was his village that Char named. Heart wasn't very interested in the subject anyway. Today, he would receive the small dragon. The small dragon had no objection. In the end, she read many books and knew that this was love, and she also always wanted to communicate with someone like that. After she said that, the small dragon transformed into a human form. She wished Heart would name her like humans, so she whispered to him to name her Snow Dragon. He named her Lisa, hoping she would help in the coming days. Flay intervened in the conversation between them and looked directly at Liza and told her that she would serve Heart first, while the little girl was second. After they agreed on everything, Flay told the girl to return with her. Despite her human form, she could still use wings and fly up. Heart used magic to fly next to the girl. Flay, who didn't have this skill, ran on the ground wild, screaming that she wouldn't be defeated. When Liza first entered the Baron family's house, she was very loved by Char and Natalia. Even Gold didn't expect the ice dragon to be such a cute little girl. For him, as long as the dragon followed the family rules, there was no problem with the family having a new member. Flay took on the task of teaching Liza normal human activities. While sweeping leaves in the garden, she told the little girl that if she dealt randomly, she wouldn't know how to handle the work here. Flay spun the broom in her hand, wanting to teach the girl how to hold it, but after only 2 turns, the broom broke in half. While Flay was bragging, Liza had finished the house garden outside neatly. The next task was washing dishes. Ironically, Flay, who was the trainer, broke them one after another, while Liza was wiping each one carefully. And when Flay tried to show her skills in cooking, the kitchen turned completely black from smoke, while Liza quietly prepared a colorful dining table. This pleased the whole family. The little girl also stood next to Char, carefully serving her and wiping anything falling from her mouth. Natalia praised Liza for her smooth performance. The servants in the house said the girl learned very quickly. They asked seriously if the girl was good at anything else. Liza thought for a bit bit and then said because she liked reading books, she had knowledge about basic magic types. Natalia suggested happily that Liza could be Char's maid. From her first day of work, Liza performed her role very well. As a close maid to Char, she took care of her, taught her magic, and read books with her. Hart, while going from the training arena, heard his sister calling him. He turned and went back. After a few days of training, she was able to use magic and make a big fireball. Liza, while teaching magic to her mistress, used the water that was made by magic to do the laundry. Hart evaluated that the girl was teaching magic to his sister and at the same time finishing housework. Liza was indeed a very good girl, able to learn and quick to adapt. Suddenly, an idea came to his mind. Could Liza be the servant he was looking for? When he looked for the second time at the two girls in the training arena, Hart was confused. How could he separate the two who were now friends? Hart encouraged himself and said there must be a solution. He whispered a question. Wasn't there that trick? Using the magic door, Liza could enter from a door to the capital as Hart's servant and then return immediately to the castle, and this would be good for both. Hart felt that the problem of finding a servant was solved. The next step would focus on the expulsion mission from school. During the break, Hart acted as if it was a coincidence and told the two girls that next week he would go to school in the royal capital. When they heard the news, Char was very happy and thought about the nasty people with magic. She asked Liza to cancel all plans for the day to summon the knights for a round table meeting. Char announced that the round table was a secret meeting. Besides Liza and Flay, the golem and Johnny were also present. When Flay heard that Hart was preparing to enter the royal school, she slammed the table violently and asked him why he hadn't told her before. Char apologized and said she just learned about the matter now. The little girl emphasized that because he was her brother, the choice of timing and audience surely had meaning. She heard her brother say that school was a very dangerous place, so she wouldn't let her big brother be scared. According to what Char understood about her brother, Hart surely placed a magic door in the royal capital, so she decided to go with Liza and Flay to the capital on a trip to gather information. Johnny and the golem's mission was to prepare for the day of arrival and make pandemonium develop further. Although Liza sat at the same table with them, she knew the matter needed to be reported to Hart. Hart thanked the girl, without them informing him, and who knew what would have happened if she hadn't. Liza asked seriously if he was really facing a mysterious organization. Hart knew she was thinking seriously, so he chose his words carefully to not upset her. He admitted he was moving secretly behind the scenes and said directly that he wanted Liza to come with him to the royal capital as his close servant. Hart told her that the details would be explained later, but she was the only one who could know and do this. It was a very important mission. When Liza saw Hart's seriousness, she agreed to help him. The cooperation between them was completely secret. No one in the house knew. On the other hand, Flay was still trying hard to be a real maid with Char's help. The first mission, changing into the maid uniform, failed because Flay couldn't fit into the clothes. For the second mission, Char asked her if she knew how to fly. Flay replied that flying wasn't exactly impossible. Then she showed her by jumping up and down and flew into the nearby forest. When she returned, she was covered in tree branches and dirt. Char, not understanding, looked at Flay with sparkling eyes and praised her skill. Natalia, while coming out of the house, asked what they were doing. When she learned the little girl wanted to learn flying magic, she was alarmed and didn't like the idea, saying that her daughter wasn't old enough for such strenuous activities. Flay, without another choice, ran to look for Hart to help her. He had seen everything on the surveillance screen. As soon as she opened the door, he gave her a small glider sufficient for only one person to fly. Once again, when he saw his sister sitting on the glider happily, Hart whispered that the first mission succeeded. The next step was to know Liza's daily routine. He asked the girl directly what she did during the day when secluded. Liza said the first thing was waking up at 12 to read the book left from the previous day, sleeping in the afternoon, waking up again at night to read, and then again, sleeping. Hart whispered, asking if this was really an ideal life. Then he asked her about her food. Liza calculated that she ate almost once a week. Hart was impressed and said she was even on a diet. She was truly an expert in self-isolation. On her quiet day, Liza went to Hart and asked him to explain the mechanism of the magic door. He used his hand and explained that it was simply placing two doors in two places and connecting them. The little girl, putting her hand on her chin, said no. His words explained nothing. Liza expressed her opinion that teleportation magic was originally high-level magic and no one could do it alone. Hart found a trick and explained that since he didn't feel much magic consumption, maybe it was something different. Liza was alerted and asked if this magic was not from this world. Hart sighed and thought maybe the girl understood. After a few days, Hart designed a device to measure magic levels and asked everyone to come for the test. First was Flay, who got 40 out of 77. Liza was 36 out of 71. When Char saw the scores, she praised the two a lot. Hart thought that magical beings naturally had high magic levels. When Char's turn came, he was surprised that her score was also very high, 61. He thought if he wasn't mistaken, the magic level published for the kingdom was only 44. Flay spoke and praised praised the girl, saying this wasn't bad. Hart asked his sister seriously if she continued training, she could reach the maximum immediately. Char replied saying this wasn't possible. Before she even had awareness, she made a fireball, so Mom cast a sealing spell. Amazed, Hart asked if this was real, so there was a genius here. Char, being curious, asked about her big brother's level, without waiting for an answer, and sat. Flay replied saying of course it was absolute. Hart just said secret. Hart's registration day finally came, and the whole house went to see him off. Liza, whom he brought along, was hiding her feet and tail. Without these things, the little girl looked a bit worried. When Flay understood she wasn't the one going, she fell to the ground in pain. Char, standing next to her brother, encouraged him, saying that evil would be defeated and for her big brother to do his best. Marion was excited. She took something from the Baron and entered her brother's room to show it to him. List guessed the letter was a notice about Hart going to the royal capital. He told his sister that these things didn't need to be announced step by step. Marion disagreed, saying this was because her brother wanted to recruit Hart, so she was trying with all effort. She wanted to know why her brother wanted to reach this point. List replied he only wanted to know Hart's power. After that time, he tried his best to refine his magic and sword arts, but every time he felt Hart left him far behind. So the only way was to study in the same school to know if he was approaching Hart's level. List teased his sister and said she was more infatuated with Hart than him, sitting in their father's room for a long time waiting for the recommendation letter. He said he had no say in romance or anything like that, but was it really like that? He sighed seriously and asked his sister if the situation was tense. List heard about strange religious groups spreading in the academy. Marion asked her brother if he knew about them. They were followers of Lucifer. She heard it was a team disguised as a band from the state of Mega. Their philosophy was extreme and they obeyed demons, not only in the academy. They said this power was expanding throughout the country, and also the number of nobles joining was increasing, and they were receiving huge investment. List told his sister seriously about the rumors that the money was coming from their mother. He truly didn't know what their mother was planning. If he wanted to confess, List was actually afraid of her. She became more and more extreme now. The news about the dispute between the king and the queen was spreading throughout the country. Although he didn't dare, he thought there was a high probability that their mother wanted to crush their father. List asked his sister what they would do. She replied that although this was just a fleeting thought, maybe Hart could change the situation. At this point, List thought about the story of the Dark Knight in Baron Gold's lands, an ally of justice who could defeat even dragons. List stood up suddenly and said if they asked for help from that person, wouldn't the problem be solved easier than he imagined? Giselot entered and interrupted their talk, saying that her children were talking very enthusiastic. Marion greeted her and said it had been a long time since they last met. She praised her, saying every time they met, she became more beautiful like the former queen. Suddenly, she grabbed the princess's neck and asked her if she was still looking at her collar. She screamed loudly, asking if it looked strange, pitiful, or if she was mocking her. When he saw his sister about to be killed, List screamed, begging his mother to stop. Giselot let go of her hand and laughed loudly, saying she was just joking. She advised Marion that eyes which look without thinking could lose her the dignity of a lady. Then she went to ask List about news of Baron Gold's son, who would study in the same school with her son. Giselot emphasized that leaving the countryside, the boy would surely be very lonely, so her son must be a friend to the boy. She whispered in the prince's ear and asked him to gather information about the Dark Knight from Gold's son. Seeing her leaving, List stood in disbelief, wondering if she intended to drag Hart into something bigger than imagination. On Hart's side, he had just exited the door in the forest next to the royal capital, just because this place could hide the door. Standing on a high place, Hart looked towards the royal capital. This distance, if they flew, would take little time, but they had no choice but to walk. Liza heard a sound and pointed to another side and called Hart to look. There was an evil buffalo running after a group of people driving a carriage and a horse. Liza thought the reason was hunger, so it was running and attacking humans. Hart wanted to ignore the matter, but if Char knew, it would be a big problem. Now he wasn't in a hurry, so he had to intervene and help. Hart changed into the Dark Knight form and rushed towards the carriage to stop it and helped the people on the carriage get down quickly. At that moment, one woman from the carriage told the people to run. She would hold the evil buffalo away from them. Hart thought she was strong, so he stayed standing aside watching. But surprisingly, the evil buffalo, with just one pass, pushed her away. If it stepped on her one more time, she would die. Hart grabbed the buffalo in the right time before it hurt her. He also took the opportunity and healed the girl. A small boy with admiring glowing eyes approached to thank him. The Dark Knight bowed and told the boy there was no need for thanks. He did this for justice. Hart also took the opportunity to fix the carriage for the people. The girl standing next to him said that, as a poor human like her getting a ride, she was very grateful. Usually she would thank with money or something, but Hart understood what she wanted, so he waved his hand and told her not to worry. Justice works without charge. After the group left him, he and Liza gave the evil buffalo food until it was full so it wouldn't attack citizens again, and then they continued to the city. On the way, Hart asked the little girl, "In your opinion, why aren't you smiling?" Liza replied that the girl from before gave her a strange feeling. If she got closer, maybe she would have known. Hart didn't reply to the girl because he didn't intend to stay in this place much. The chance to meet that person again was zero. The registration process, standing in line, filling out enrollment information, and getting a room made Hart very tired. As soon as he entered his room, he placed the magic door to return. Today's activity was enough. As soon as Char saw him coming out, she asked her brother enthusiastically for news of the royal capital. He stretched on the sofa tiredly and asked Flay to prepare food. Char whispered to Flay, and the two of them used the excuse that they would go out to buy food for him, and then entered the door and went to the royal capital. Hart, uncomfortable leaving them alone, also followed them. He hadn't imagined the streets around the palace would be this crowded. After they ate, Char brought a map of the area and put it on the table in front of everyone to know the geography of the royal capital area. The little girl started distributing tasks. Flay walks towards the south, Liza walks towards the west, and she and her brother investigate the east. Hart looked at everyone confused. Hart asked them if they didn't want to come here to play. Char replied, of course, saying they wanted to, but they needed to understand the geography if any circumstance occurred. The little girl emphasized that the goal was just understanding geography, so she made everyone not be loud or draw attention. When Flay told them to trust her, in Hart's mind, he immediately thought that trusting her meant death, but since he was present, he would walk with Char. They passed by many famous places in the royal capital. On the way, Char even chose 2 nice earrings. Hart spoiled his sister. Whatever she wanted, he bought it. Char ran happily ahead, and he was behind her thinking to alert his sister to be careful and not bump into people. But before he finished his words, the little girl ran and bumped into someone walking on the road. When he ran to the place, he knew she was the girl he helped before. The girl looked at Hart and asked him if they had met before. Since last time he was in the Dark Knight form, Hart replied it was the first time she met him. The girl thought and said she actually didn't have memories of Hart's face, but she had a memory of the great magic power she felt from him. She tilted her head and told him that his magic was only 2. Hart pretended to be annoyed and said even if he had the great power she spoke of, he would feel only mockery. This topic of losing honor, even if a lie, shouldn't be said. The girl thought because she had just passed through a long journey, she felt tiredness and confusion. She apologized sincerely for disturbing Hart. Hart reminded her that the most important thing wasn't she in a hurry? The girl remembered what she had to do, apologized to the siblings again, and then ran quickly. When he saw his sister still looking after the girl, he asked her if something was wrong. Char didn't understand, but felt that this person was very strange, a feeling that she was not a normal person. His sister's words made Hart remember that Liza said something similar. He wondered if this person had high abilities like magical creatures, or if Char felt something else. Anyway, he didn't want to get involved in these problems. From tomorrow, he would start school and lock himself in his room safely. Hart returned to his room, and his copy told him that a faculty member entered suddenly asking for an assessment before registration. Hart refused to go and said that it was enough sitting in this room for a long time. Hart thought that this could be a good chance. He would perform so poorly that the teachers would expel him from school. He went out excited and thought if this succeeded, he wouldn't have to stay here again and settle matters quickly. Hart reached the door. Oh, he lined up to take the assessment test. He was surprised by the luxury of the royal capital. Just one room was big enough for more than 100 people. Hart was impressed and looked around, thinking that if he succeeded next spring, he would study in a room like this. He didn't let what was before his eyes deceive him. He was determined to fail this assessment test. He read the first question, actually didn't understand anything, so he just wrote, "I don't know." Regarding barrier magic, Hart answered at a certain level. He was satisfied with the test he did. He answered quickly, so surely he wouldn't get any points. Finally came the turn of ancient magic. Hart remembered that he read a book with his sister. The author's name was very long, and it was very interesting. While thinking, he wrote everything without realizing it. When he finished, he was surprised. Gold announced that everyone would move to the second room for the magic assessment. Hart didn't want to go and asked why since his magic was only level 2, but the teacher insisted and said these were the teacher's orders. In the magic room was a small girl. When she saw Hart, she praised him and said he matched her taste perfect. She introduced herself as Teretta, and she teaches ancient magic here. She laughed loudly and asked Hart if he was thinking that this child was a teacher. Then she changed her tone of voice and screamed that he was indeed rude. Teretta said even if he was nominated by the kingdom, if he spoiled her mood, the result would be that he returns home. Hart wondered excitedly. Really? His interest shifted to the small teacher. Hart's attitude that she saw wasn't fear like the others, but full of expectation. When he looked at the small teacher in front of him, while she was screaming, he felt a headache. Teacher Pollux reminded the doctor to get to the main point. He handed over the test that Hart finished. When he saw Toretta's expression change, Hart felt reassured and thought she was actually upset with his random answers. Then he started measuring his magic on the orb, not very interested because it would show 2, but the light from Hart's magic caused the orb to break. He cursed and said it was indeed fake. Hart expected punishment from Toretta and his expulsion from school. Toretta screamed loudly and asked Teacher Pollux if he saw something. The orb broke. This was proof that his magic was so great that the orb couldn't measure it. The teacher replied, while annoyed, that he heard rumors that Hart's magic was only 2. The doctor laughed loudly and said she believed there were exceptions for everything. Suddenly, she screamed that the orb was a magic measuring tool, but didn't understand everything. As a magician, one must understand before discussing his power. Toretta looked at Hart's test with sparkling eyes and said it indeed didn't reach the level of court magicians. Bold answers like, "I don't know," in the test were full of enthusiasm, and his expression in barrier magic was very excellent. Toretta got more excited when she reached the ancient magic section, which quoted directly from her work. Hart heard this and felt he dug his grave himself. It turned out that the author of that long book was Toretta. With all enthusiasm, she announced she would take this small boy instead of handing him to the other teachers. Hart was watching them while they were fighting and felt that something was unnatural. He was being dragged in for their amusement. He returned frustrated to tell Hart see everything. All coming matters would depend on him. Understanding Hart's anxiety about school, his sister took out the gun her brother gave her and handed it to him. The little girl encouraged him to try his best and complete the mission perfectly. Hart was sad and said he didn't want to go to school. After all, he was just a copy without magic, so how would he deal with the bad people at school? And in the end, as a copy, how could he refuse the mission Hart assigned to him? So he endured and sat in class all day, and as soon as the bell rang, Hart C wanted to escape quickly to the room. On his way back, he met a group of people. Intuition told Hart to stay away from them because interfering with them wouldn't bring a good result. He pressed himself against the wall and tried to disappear, not expecting that while walking, his head would bump into the girl from before. They looked at each other in surprise. Schneider noticed them and asked why they didn't bow. The girl replied saying she was rude, but school rules didn't specify this thing. Schneider himself didn't want to touch them. He just wanted to maintain his authority in front of everyone. The girl apologized and said she was new on her first day and didn't know. She looked at Hart C, waiting for him to come up with an excuse to let them go. No one expected that Hart C would suddenly hold his stomach and scream that he needed to go to the bathroom. This made Schneider boil with anger. He screamed and said, "Bastard, how dare you leave me with such rude words?" He used magic, wanting to teach Hart manners. Hart didn't think much, but knew that if he didn't run, the one losing his life would be him. Schneider stood from afar, directed his magic at Hart C, and attacked him, hitting the ground immediately. A large piece of cloth tore from the back of his clothes. As soon as they were about to leave, Hart C, once again not understanding the situation, stood up. Luckily, the barrier activation worked well. Hart C looked and saw the vice president's annoying expression. Then he remembered he had to show pain. His exaggerated acting increased Schneider's anger even more. Schneider intended to use magic again to attack. Hart was scared. He took out the gun and fired and seized the opportunity and escaped quickly to the room. When the news reached Hart, he screamed loudly and asked why everything had to be so complicated. While checking the barriers around him, he saw the image of the girl on her way to the senior student's dormitory. The scene shifted to Schneider's house, and he was violent, splashing water on the person treating his wounds. Naturally, he didn't accept the girl's apology easily. He made a request that didn't leave Hart silent. He appeared again in the form of the Dark Knight after helping the girl return to the room. He created a separate space to teach Schneider a lesson. He attached a magical device to his shoulder and warned that if he tried to remove it or use magic, it would tighten on his shoulder and suck his blood. The Dark Knight set a condition. If he sincerely reflected on his actions, he might consider letting him go. In the morning, when he arrived at school, rumors about the son of Baron Gold who defeated Schneider spread everywhere. Wherever Hart went, admiring people's eyes were behind him. He couldn't bear this feeling and wanted to find a way to escape. Suddenly, he bumped into Toretta, who asked if he wanted to come to the laboratory. Toretta taught Hart about the curriculum of the academy. The first thing was the night course. Students learned to apply magic in training. This course aimed to qualify soldiers and knights of the forces, essential to the country in the future. The second course was academic. They teach the most effective use of magic, or study and develop magic in the research institute. Toretta noticed Hart was interested in ancient magic, so coming to her place was a right decision. She offered him a paper to sign and confirm if he wanted to study. Liszt, seeing Hart from afar, ran screaming that he found him. The prince greeted him with a direct blow to his face. Hart dodged it easily and replied he didn't know who attacked attacked him suddenly until he heard Marion calling. List angrily. She looked at her brother and scolded him, asking if anyone sends greetings in such a rude way. List complained and said, Hart became stronger again, didn't he? They returned to the main topic. Marion asked Hart if he entered this institute before. If not, he could join the research institute with her. List interrupted his sister and said she was very selfish, and Hart would join his course. Toretta screamed loudly and said for the two boys to shut up and said Hart would join her. List recognized her as the doctor with the very long name and whispered in Hart's ear, telling him she researches ancient things, and there have been no results for a long time, especially since she fights a lot with other teachers. Toretta objected and said it wasn't that she didn't have achievements, but others didn't see them, and so the three fought non-stop. Coincidentally, the girl Hart helped before passed by them and was curious looking to see what was happening. Hart thought he could use her to leave, said goodbye to them, said he'd see them later, and ran quickly away. Hart ran away from the building until he stopped panting and apologized to the girl for dragging her into trouble. The girl didn't mind, but looked at Hart intently and asked him if he and the person from yesterday were the same person. She could feel that the person in front of her and the person who escaped yesterday were two completely different people. Exactly. Hart yesterday didn't let her feel magic, but today there was immense pressure dominating everyone. Hart now couldn't answer her clearly, wishing she would consider them one person. Hart looked at the girl for a bit and asked her if the matter ended there. Infilia paused for a bit and then bowed in front of Hart and said, first, she wanted to apologize for dragging him into problems. Second, she wanted to thank him for helping her escape from Schneider's group. Finally, she made a request and wanted Hart to be her friend. She would be happy if he accepted her request. Hart was surprised by this offer and asked her if she never had friends before. Infilia asked Hart for time to tell him her story. She told him that since the day she was born, she was abandoned 4 times because she could speak. In the end, a monastery took her in. Even though she was accepted in the monastery, life wasn't easy. The priest she loved the most died when she was 5 years old. It was a closed environment with no contact with people around her, so she didn't know how humans lived. Hart understood her and said that Infilia wanted to learn to make friends. That was her goal. So she chose the wrong person because he didn't make friends outside, so he didn't know good social customs. Infilia saw this as a good thing. They could learn together. She said that they had many things in common. Hart thought he would exploit this person to avoid many problems at school. Remembering the study mission, Hart asked Infilia if she chose the research class or not. When he heard it was ancient magic, Hart got tired of seeing this ant everywhere. Without another choice, he chose Toretta to be in the same class with her for convenience. Infilia rejoiced and asked if he still wanted to be her friend after hearing her story. Infilia was very happy and wanted to thank Hart. Char was bored because her brother's presence at school increased her free time and she didn't know what to do. At that moment, she felt that Hart had good news and ran quickly to say goodbye to Flay to meet her brother at home. Flay and Liza stayed behind. After a little chat, the latter mentioned magical creatures. Flay told Liza that her previous job was sitting next to her demon master and uniting magical creatures. Her relationship was very strong with the demon, who could be considered her best friend. Flay's eyes glistened with admiration when she mentioned her master. Her old master, the demon, was a person who always thought of magical creatures and monsters first. He was a kind person, and exactly because of this kindness, he always had problems with other demons regarding how to deal with humans. That was why Flay always had to intervene to solve these problems. The demon had a very noble goal: to create a paradise where humans and monsters lived together. Flay now thought that maybe from the beginning, he didn't want to fight Princess Lightning and let himself lose intentionally. There was something that surprised Flay very much. When Princess Lightning attacked him, he let all the magical creatures escape and sacrificed himself to achieve his goals. Flay was sure that he planned to reincarnate as a human before that. Liza asked if that meant he would reincarnate as a human and change the human's perspective from the Foundation. Flay couldn't be sure if the demon Lord had thought about the matter to this extent, but his innocent way of thinking was what she loved. She remembered Hart when he said that. Memories from before reincarnation disappear complete. Flay guessed that this was to abandon the sweet part, where he couldn't be cruel. Flay continued and said that the Demon Lord always simplified their types, so when Hart named her, she was very surprised. She also didn't hesitate to reveal his name when he was still the Demon Lord. Liza replied saying, right, not just anyone could know the Demon Lord's name. Flay told her not to reveal his name to anyone. The Demon Lord's name was Incibilia. On Hart's side, he had just made friends with a girl, and when he heard her name, Incibilia, he felt the name was very long, so he shortened it to Iris and didn't think that Flay had mentioned this name before. Iris didn't have a problem with the short name. She asked Hart if he had chosen classes or not. If not, they could do it together. She saw that working together would be more effective. Hart enthusiastically took Iris back to his room to do the assignments together. When they reached the door, he just remembered she was a girl. Now it would be awkward to send her away again. The only choice was to finish quickly and return home. Char was sitting in the room waiting for her brother. And when she saw Hart brought a beautiful girl, she laughed loudly. Char teased her brother, saying he indeed had a beautiful friend. Then she muttered sadly, saying, of course he would find 5 or 10 friends. Hart wasn't interested in his sister's words. He sat at the table and started choosing the class. He focused a little, then got bored and asked his sister to choose for him. Char agreed happily, prepared a paper seriously, and handed it to him. After returning, in her free time, Char kept talking to Iris without stopping. The older girl told her that her brother had exceeded the level of learning from anyone else. Her brother's existence was very superior. Iris asked Hart seriously if he was really that special. Hart inwardly said, no, of course. She really believed it. If he didn't get Char out, matters would get worse. The little girl read her brother's eyes, stood up, and said goodbye to the two. Hart's studies after that were organized entirely with the subjects Char chose. When he looked at the difficult subjects his sister chose, Hart felt this was good because difficult subjects mean the teacher's expectations would be very high, so Hart would easily be seen as failing. On the day of assignment distribution, Liza met Iris again. The little girl asked Hart cautiously if she was really human. Even up close, she couldn't determine if Iris was a magical creature or a human from her appearance. Hart didn't think she was a magical creature, and she didn't show harmful intentions, so there was no need to worry. Hart was assigned to Class C, the average class among 5. The general performance was average. Before studying, the teacher explained to everyone that they could be demoted or promoted based on tests. The teacher started distributing the first evaluation test to the class. Hart thought to himself that the chance came quickly. In this test, he would depend on showing weakness and pretending to be behind, and then say goodbye to the class today. Hart looked at the whole test. It was very easy. Char did it half a year ago. He didn't know how the teacher in the class was thinking, giving them a children's test. At any rate, if he made huge mistakes now, it would look intentional, so he decided to make low-level mistakes and aim for 6 points through simple mistakes. All Hart's calculations collapsed when the teacher evaluated the papers and announced that the class average was only 2 points. When he looked at Hart's paper, the teacher's eyes glistened despite the many mistakes. He got 6 points. Hart looked at the people around him and clapped, not understanding what happened. Maybe his exam was just easy. After thinking a bit, he understood that this wasn't because everyone was weak or the test was easy, but because his sister was a genius. Everything was too late. The teacher told Hart he would recommend him to Class A. When Hart entered Class A, Iris and List flanked him and started fighting over the seat next to Hart. Hart surrendered and let things go. The teacher entered the class angry at the noise and slammed her schedule on the table as a warning. She introduced herself as Belgium, teaching arithmetic theory, and her eyes were on the 3. She screamed that the 3 top students who chose advanced classes, sitting in the front row and fighting, were very brave. Belgium warned them to prepare psychologically. If they couldn't answer, they would be expelled from the class. She called Hart and Iris, who were from the Research Institute, and said she would teach them with sincerity. Belgium started the lecture. Today's topic was primary and secondary attributes. Iris was called to put her hand on a crystal ball. She looked into it and said that the presence of all attributes was a very wonderful sight. Belgium offered her to join the Research Institute, promising to train her fully. After the offer, Iris refused completely. Belgium returned to the lecture and used Iris's attributes as an example to teach the class about different attribute types, but the crystal ball couldn't clarify all details. Research to measure this was ongoing, but very difficult. Hart was silent and thought if the topic was really that hard, he just needed to look at the requirements, and all indicators in Iris were clear in detail. On the platform, Belgium started explaining why the topic was hard because, depending on the case, values could be chaotic. If someone used magic to boost power in the secondary property of fire, the percentage would increase over fire magic again. She looked at List and asked why that was. List thought quickly, then replied saying maybe because of proficiency level, and explained further that because it was used a lot, he became professional. Belgium praised his logic and said not bad, but research rejected it, Hart whispered, and said these were the hidden attributes. Belgium, who was standing close, heard the words and hit the table enthusiastically, asking Hart what he said and to repeat it. Hart explained that he thought there were hidden attributes related to attributes. For example, if fire had a secondary property of enhancement, the effect of the magic that enhances itself would increase greatly. Belgium patted Hart's shoulder and screamed loudly, asking how he knew this, because her modern research wise owl was a person who sent his research to the Research Institute irregularly, an unknown person whose research was very advanced, and they decided not to display it. Belgium got excited because all this was done in secret. Even the royal family didn't receive the report. She said loudly she didn't expect Hart to be such a rare talent. Once again, she asked Hart how he felt and if he wanted to leave ancient magic and come to her class. Hart refused. Iris reminded the teacher that recruiting during class was against etiquette. The 2 distinguished ones chose to follow Toretta, and this made her very happy. Finally, her enthusiasm was contagious. Thanks to the 2 students who joined, the Research Institute could continue continue until they graduated. Toretta ran to prepare a celebration party and ordered Hart and Iris to rest there before she left. Hart sat next to Iris, looking confused as to why all this happened to him. This day was supposed to be the original copy, but because Hart faced exhausting events in the morning, he didn't want to go again. Anyway, since the confirmation was already signed, Hart C exploited the chance when no one noticed to escape and unintentionally hit someone lying on the ground. Toretta was walking by and explained that Schneider was affected by a strange type of magic and came to ask her to see him. She maintained an interested expression and looked at the person lying and said, "What a good chance to use someone for ancient magic research." Toretta called Iris to come. Look, she performed some operations on Schneider and then asked her opinion on what type of magic this was. Iris observed and then thought if it could be magic without attributes. Toretta heard the result, praised her, and said she was indeed the best in the exam. She told the dragon that, in the end, this was done with attribute-less barrier magic. This was Hart's message. The next question was, what is the biggest difference between modern magic and ancient magic? He sighed and replied randomly, saying maybe because of age. Toretta suppressed her anger and turned the question to Iris. The two discussed for a long time before calling the person who was fainted to wake up. She told him that the research institute couldn't solve this type of magic, but the person who cast the magic could. Toretta told him there was no other solution but to reveal quickly who he was. Schneider ground his teeth and replied that he also didn't know, but what he knew was that the person who did this was wearing black and had a strange voice. When Toretta heard these words, she laughed loudly and asked if being defeated by an unknown person wasn't shameful. Toretta had already read his thoughts early on. He was just afraid to put himself in danger if he spoke. Fine, even if he didn't say it, she was able to guess who this person was. Toretta focused on her female student and the second student and started talking about the ally of justice in the Barren Gold region who had attributes similar to the description Schneider gave. She suspected that this person always worked inside the region until Hart came to the Imperial capital. Toretta got very excited and asked Hart what he was hiding from her and told him to speak if he had other magic. The consecutive questions made Hart C want to cry, inwardly calling the original Hart to come solve the matter. Suddenly, the Dark Knight appeared on the window frame. As soon as Schneider saw him, he got angry and asked if he was watching them to appear at this precise moment. The Dark Knight just told him to think quickly about the conditions he set and cancel tomorrow's duel. When he was about to leave, Toretta tried to catch him with her magic. She had many questions, and if he didn't answer, he wouldn't be able to leave. As soon as she finished speaking, Hart burst out with everything that was holding him. He took the opportunity to teach Toretta a lesson not to restrain people without a reason. Toretta, controlled by magic and unable to move, was forced to beg and promise that she wouldn't do that again without a reason. The reception party had 4 people. Toretta spoke enthusiastically with Iris. Hart sat silently watching them. After a while, Teacher Pollux started talking to Hart C. He told him that Toretta was his student when she was young. She was frank like that and very smart. She would learn one thing and understand 10, learn 10 and understand 100, and she achieved great success. Because there wasn't anything for her to do in the palace, she enrolled in this academy, so he was also tasked to watch over her. In the end, everything he taught her from the start was no longer needed. Toretta was truly a genius. Not only could she research new magic, but she was also considered a sage and the leader of modern magic. The party ended and Iris rolled over and slept. Toretta tried to get Hart's attention and asked him if he knew why Iris chose ancient magic. She met her in the exam and she got a very high result. Her feeling wasn't different from any normal person trying to achieve their dream, but unfortunately, Iris's magic value was still low, and more frustratingly, her indicators might not increase further. But ancient magic was the right choice because it could study clues to increase magic levels. Toretta had never researched it before. She would start now, and she was very excited even if the success rate was very small. On the other side, Schneider was very angry. The news of withdrawing from tomorrow's duel would spread in the academy. He hit his hand on the table several times and whispered that he went as far as cooperating with Lucifer to make his father the next king, but someone kept stopping him. He couldn't accept his plans being destroyed like this. Schneider summoned a special assassination team and ordered that during the night they must kill Iris's group. The plan started to be executed when all 4 in the research institute slept. Outside, they were careful to set up barriers for sound isolation and intruder detection too. The attack team was composed of the most skilled people. When they approached the research institute, they discovered it was protected by an invisible, impenetrable wall. Suddenly, the door opened in the wall and everyone was pulled inside. The remaining people started warning about the rumor that an unknown person always protected Hart. They needed to be more careful. After a while, many doors opened and the Dark Knight attacked from every direction. The group fell into a state of confusion. They had heard about one person, but when he appeared, there was a Dark Knight from every direction. The assassination team leader discovered the truth behind all this. There was only one Dark Knight sitting above controlling controlling everything, and now he was the only one who could move. Hart complained that his master wanted to kill people over a small matter. This couldn't be tolerated. He captured the entire assassination team and took them to Schneider's house, asking him if one clip wasn't enough. Schneider was terrified and asked if Hart would kill him. Like a madman, he searched for a syringe and injected himself. Hart, looking at the annoying thing in front of him, complained that his senior turned into a monster using a mysterious syringe. He didn't know how to act, although he wanted to pretend he didn't see anything. At that time, the barrier connected to Char opened. The little girl sitting in front of the screen called her brother loudly. She had gone to sleep early, but feeling her brother was working, she woke up. Hart sighed and told the little girl that a while ago he was fighting a mysterious monster. The curious girl asked what monster it was. Hart explained to her quickly that it was a human turned into a monster by an organization. Char asked anxiously if her brother had a way to save this person. When he saw her pained facial expression, he had no choice but to help this lucky person. Hart flew in front of him, trying to minimize damage to Schneider, but he was grabbed by big hands. He was squeezed between his palms. He tried to use binding magic to open his hand, but Schneider chose to destroy both his arms, to grow 2 new ones. Hart understood that this type regenerates. He didn't know what to do next. Char opened the connection again to report to her brother that this monster was a bit strange. Its body shrunk a little. Also, the little girl noticed with her eyes that his skin color lightened. Hart concluded that when he cut the parts that enlarged, the body would gradually return to its original form. Thanks to his sister's guidance, Schneider was saved and returned to being a human. Char praised her brother and said he would have a nice dream tonight. After he said goodbye to his sister, he wanted to complete the previous conversation with Schneider. As soon as he heard Hart calling his name, he ran to escape quickly. It seemed today they couldn't continue a serious talk. Hart thought about talking another time, but he needed to collect the syringe used today. It was an exhausting day. He needed to clean the villa quickly and go to sleep. Hart opened the window and stood next to Hart C, who was flying outside, and asked him how he felt. He started enjoying these things. He and Hart had a special connection, so he was sure both felt the same feeling. Hart didn't deny that the whole world outside was much better, but somehow he felt that communication with people wasn't bad either. Hart looked at the people sleeping inside the institute and told Hart C to sleep there tonight because he missed the curfew in the dorms. Hart praised Hart C honestly and told him he did very well. The group of servants under Char's management went into the capital streets to gather information. In the end, they reached results. The relationship between the king and the queen was deteriorating, so the situation among other nobles also became tense. All Char's initial expectations were right. She felt danger coming to the capital. Johnny said the enemy already started moving and asked Char how the royals deal with the front forces. Johnny asked the little girl to replay these images for them to see. When they saw the battle between Hart and Schneider, one after another, Char, then Flay, then Johnny, all looked with admiration and kept praising. Liza, sitting next to them, felt everything was out of control, but didn't intend to remind them. Then Char started explaining that the person inside the screen was the vice president of the student council. According to Char's deduction, he takes orders from the hidden student council. In short, they knew about Hart's power, so they caused many problems since her brother enrolled. This had a direct relation to a big evil organization that would shake the capital. Flay said this wasn't important. Even if the opponent was strong, he wouldn't be able to defeat Hart. Char replied that despite that, this time they didn't know where anyone was, so this would be a burden on them. That's why this was the time for everyone to move, infiltrate the academy, gather information, and reveal matters gradually. Char announced that they were people with the same idea, gathering now to support her brother's activities. Hart watched the group of children planning, but he didn't intend to participate. He would settle for watching like this and ensure their safety, because a quiet life without problems was all he wanted. And so, our story ends today. So before we end our story, don't forget to like, share, and comment on the video, because this encourages us to continue. If you are new to our channel, subscribe and activate the bell button to receive everything new. See you next time, and that's it. Goodbye.